I'm really, really excited to talk about Weightless. Since I watched the film, it's really stayed with me. And I want to start actually with a quote that I saw on the Weightless website, which is actually by the director, Lois Norman. And the quote is that self-acceptance doesn't have a sell-by date. And I loved having that quote alongside the film. So firstly, I'd love to just dive in to the central theme of the film Weightless and really what inspired you to tackle that in a project.
Well, I had anorexia in my early teens and 20s. I have a theory that it's never really cured. I think it's managed because I think the characteristics that predispose us to some of these mental health issues are part of us. So I see a lot of references to eating disorders in young people, but because I have this sense, certainly with myself, I've still got quite a strange relationship with food, but it's something that never completely goes away. So I wanted to put that into a drama, because I think it's important for older or women, possibly more so than men, and of course it's not exclusively a female condition. I just thought it was important that to acknowledge, and it's surprising the number of women who have said that they still struggle with an eating disorder, not necessarily anorexia, but also body dysmorphia, which I think it kind of taps into as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love that mission of yours to really highlight something that perhaps isn't recognized in a certain age demographic, because it's interesting. Like, if we go back to that quote, that self-acceptance doesn't have a sell-by date. As I was watching the film, I was really having this sense of, I don't know, perhaps it's like an inner hope that we have that we might grow out of something.
Yeah.
But rather than how are we going to grow with it?
Well, yeah.
And that really kind of struck me when I was watching the film, and I was getting a sense of what that journey might have been for someone who's growing with an issue, a mental health illness. So how was it when you were taking this theme, this idea, and thinking, okay, how do I turn that into a creative project? Because I know there'll be people who are listening who are thinking, actually, yeah, there is something that either I'm experiencing or I see other people experiencing that I want to put into a creative project. So how do you take something like that and make it creative?
Yeah, I think, it's quite interesting because my background's in theatre, which is very text-based form of dramatic writing, and film is of course very visual. So one of the things that drew me to having Maureen alone on the beach was I made myself have one character, because I thought I don't want to rely on dialogue, but with an eating disorder, the voices in the head I think are really significant. So I wanted to give this sense that the voices that Maureen lives with are voices that she's had from a very early age, and they are still there. And interestingly, I listened to an article on Radio 4 about a woman in her late 40s who hadn't had any dealings with this beast for some years, and then all of a sudden the voice was back in her head saying something quite abusive. And I have had that experience myself, that you think this has gone away, it's not happening, and then it says it's almost like it's not you. Obviously it is you, it's part of your brain, but it feels very other. Yeah. And I thought that was quite a dramatic thing to put on a film, this sense that her past is still a part of her and it's still haunting her. But at the same time, I've been reading a lot about cold water swimming, and I'm not a cold water swimmer, but on the rare occasions when I've managed to be brave enough to get into ice, it is such a liberating and invigorating experience that you really do lose all sense of worries and and that sense of being supported by the water and be weightless. I mean, in the water now does weigh anything, so it's all kind of connected. So yeah.
That's really interesting, that constraint that you gave yourself to have one character in the film. And just to kind of unpick that a little bit more, because I think it can be super interesting to bring a constraint when you're trying to work with a theme, especially if it's got like a really powerful message.
Yeah.
What was the creative journey? Was it that you started off recognizing, actually, the way that I want to portray the experience of anorexia is very much an internal experience, so I'm not going to have any other characters? Or was it that you said, let's just have one character, and then you realised, oh, I'm going to totally focus on these voices? Like, what order did it go in?
Yeah, I think it was originally a really almost cynical, practical, it'll make it a cheaper film. I just have one person in it, and it will stop me. Because I love dialogue. I mean, I just love writing it, and I thought it will really restrict me in terms of what I can, I go down this avenue I knew of just, having a great time without being visual, and I think that's so crucial with film. So, every single little detail of what Maureen is doing at the beginning of the film, I think, shows us a lot about her character and her relationship with nature comes into it as well. I think when she looks up at a seagull, and the bird is weightless, and it's so, yeah. And I think the landscape is also very important in the film, and so I spent several weeks going up and down the south coast looking for a beach that I thought would be in my mind the most suitable place to sort of stage the film. So it's quite, I find writing quite a difficult. When people ask you to go back, it's difficult sometimes to remember which part came where and how you came to the idea. I mean, it's. I think that's because you might start knowing what you want to do, but then the characters will sometimes say, "But actually, I think you should." And I know that sounds really a bit sort of pretentious, but I genuinely think once they start to get a sense of their own individual, who they are, they can become quite powerful. So yes.
that definitely resonates with me, Louise. And it's so interesting to kind of get this visual of you driving along, looking for specific locations, and that sort of feeding into the creative process. And I love that actually it started off with a kind of practical, if I just have one person in this, it's going to be easier to make the film.
Yeah.
Because I think actually sometimes those seemingly more pragmatic decisions and those difficult constraints can actually really enable the project to find another level.
Yeah, absolutely. I often think it's helpful when you're given a brief. I mean, obviously you don't have to be too restricted, but because you could write about anything in the whole world, it's sometimes quite helpful for somebody to say, well, it's got to be this, and this, and then it starts your brain focusing sort of down onto, something that you can work with, I think.
Yeah, and also what you said about knowing how much you love dialogue, but knowing that you were working in this visual medium. So you've written for the stage, you've written for radio, so now you're in this very visual medium. There's no dialogue at all. What's really interesting to me is how that must have fed the creative process in terms of being aware not just the voices that Maureen is hearing in her head, but also the sounds. The sounds in the film are so important. So at what point did the sounds come in when you were writing the script?
I think I never know which comes first, my background in radio, whether that feeds into the process, or the fact that I'm sort of a person who does hear a lot of sounds and responds to sound might make me more suitable for writing radio drama. But I think what's interesting, and I hadn't thought about this, was a director that I'm hoping to work on another short with was saying how significant sound is in cinema, and I haven't really, because it's almost like another character when you think about the immersive experience of being in a cinema. Of course, sound is really key. But I think perhaps because of my radio experience, I do tend to interpret a lot of a lot of the story will come to me as sound, and I do think it's a really, really crucial part of any film. It tells them. I think it tells as much of a story as as any words can in some respects. So
yeah, it very much did seem like this character that was adding another layer. And also what comes to me, Louise, is the inner dialogue that we hear from Maureen. If we understand this theme of, it wasn't just to bring anorexia to the forefront to talk about this, it's a significant killer, but also in a certain age of woman. So women over 50 who were still experiencing the struggle. So what strikes me is Maureen's inner dialogue. You can tell it's significantly from the past. You can tell it's a childhood themed inner dialogue. And that was so powerful to see this woman over 50 with these echoes right back from her childhood. So again, I'm really curious as to the sort of specific creative decision there to not make it inner dialogue that we might think more of like a sort of present voice, but a much more historic voice.
Well, I think certainly from my own experience that it was to some extent, I suppose we would say, bullying at school had an impact on my sense of not ever, of self-disgust really, which is, really awful when you think about it. And I can remember talking to a friend about the film before it was made and saying that's what it deals with. That I think there are multiple triggers. I don't think I think there's probably no one thing that starts somebody down this journey. I think there are often multiple. And this woman, it was really quite emotional because she became emotional saying she'd always blamed herself for her daughter's eating disorder. And I said, it could have been any, because we're always told it's all about controlling parents. I've read that repeatedly, and I think that must be very hard for parents to take on board. And I'm not convinced there's any one thing that makes somebody become unwell. And I'm interested in what you said about, I have read that of all the mental health illnesses, that anorexia is the biggest killer, which I think is probably not sort of widely appreciated. And it is really, I think it's something very, very challenging for people to go through, and for the whole family. It's not just the person that's going through it. So,
Yeah, hearing more about what you say, it's really making me understand how well you've brought all of those layers into the film, because you do really get that sense of self-disgust, and my sort of sense of compassion as I was watching the film, like that's often what gets triggered in me when I see someone in that place of self-loathing, just that huge desire to want to love them and hold them in that space. And it's interesting because we've got the central character who's remembering or hearing these voices from her past, but it very much in that present moment in a relationship of disgust with herself. But we've also got this very powerful juxtaposition of nature, Louise. So that was something I really wanted to talk to you about today. And you've kind of touched on it with the seagull being weightless in the water and hunting down those beaches. But what really struck me with the film is that you've got a woman haunted by her past, but she's engaged in an activity that's very much bringing her into the present moment. So again, talk to me about how you wanted to put those two things side by side and what that was all about.
Well, I think I think the water theme is quite a not only about the cold water swimming being so good for mental health, but that that sense of some of these elements, they are potentially life-threatening, but they're life-giving, and there's that sort of juxtaposition. So in the film, there's a sense that something bad could happen, but of course, it's a very hopeful and uplifting ending. But the power of that, you know, of the sea, and the sort of the way it's there eternally. I think there's something really comforting about, you know, nature, the changing of the seasons, and then things, you know, renewing. And in fact, I went for a job with a friend this morning along the riverbank, and, you know, all the poppies are coming out, and the buttercups, and it's just, you know, being close to the river. There's something very life affirming about, you know, the sort of the pattern of you know, the seasons and the continuity, and it's almost it's almost indescribable. I wouldn't say I'm a religious person, but I think there's a spiritual sort of side to engaging with nature, and because there's a religious theme in the film, but I think Maureen's got more of a relationship with spirituality rather than, I mean, her Catholic upbringing has not really done her any huge favours. You know, I don't want to be damning to the Catholic Church, but there are certainly things I think are quite difficult to deal with, certainly when you're growing up. So I think she's conquered all of those. I mean, even if she's not really that aware of it, she has such a strong relationship with nature that I think she has really largely conquered a lot of her damaging thoughts and you know, things from the past. So
the way that you describe nature, it's so beautiful, and I'm thinking of you saying life affirming, and also what we talked about earlier, which is how anorexia is this kind of secret silent killer. And you mentioned that the cold water, it can be dangerous, but it can also be life-saving. So I'm getting a sense of why also that felt like it was such a powerful way to show a healing path with this particular theme, because it's kind of this sense of it. You've got these two routes ahead. You've got the sense where the life is destroyed or the life is affirmed, and water feels like a really powerful element to back that up.
Yeah, definitely. So, and of course, there you know, water's used in religious, you know, in religious services and things. So I think it is it's quite a sort of significant thing to use.
Yeah. I'm also curious, Louise, when you were writing the script, because as you shared earlier, that the relationship that you have with anorexia, it might be that you lose contact for a while, but then it might resurface in your life. I'm really curious what the process of working on Weightless, sort of, you know, working on that quite painful theme, but through a creative project. What was that like for you and your own journey, your own personal growth?
Well, I think you learn a lot from your writing about yourself, and so I think originally I didn't feel as overwhelmed emotionally. I felt sort of fairly. I mean, so often I'll try and write away from my own experiences. So I think this is the closest thing I've ever written that's so much like, you know, my own personal journey. So, but I didn't feel, you know, because normally I wouldn't want to expose my own, you know, upbringing or background or anything. But for some reason, because I think it is so important, and being a short as well, you know, you're not going to reveal a huge amount, and it's just suggestions of what's gone on in the past. And I mean, even though there are references that I feel are quite closely related to myself, Maureen is still a character that isn't me, if that makes sense. I mean, I suppose inevitably every character you create has to have elements of you because it's come out of your head, but it's quite... Yeah, so I didn't feel, oddly enough, I didn't feel I was exposing myself particularly for some reason. I think once you start into the journey of your story, you can lose yourself in your story quite quickly. You almost get sort of taken over by it, and then I don't think I think particularly logically once I'm in the writing process. I think you can think. I mean, I know there are different people. Every writer is different, and certainly for certain projects, for example, for radio drama, you have to do a short pitch document in the first instance, and then you have to write an outline. So you have to write the story and how it's going to sound in order to get it commissioned. So that's the more logical part. But I think once you start the process of the characters developing, it becomes a much more, in a sense, liberating, because it just seems to come to life and you just follow their path in a way. So I did do a brief story outline for Weightless, so that I feel safer knowing roughly where I'm likely to go, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does. And actually, I really love that share, Louise, because what I'm getting is, as I'm listening to you describe this, you came to this project with a desire to talk about something that was personal, which wasn't something that you usually do, and yet it's a topic that particularly feels important to you. So I think that can motivate us to share something private if we're like, no, this has to be shared, this needs to be heard. But the way that you described it then, Maureen becoming a character outside of yourself and you kind of feeling safe within the boundaries of the outline of the story. To me, it's sort of, because as I work as a coach, I work on a lot of people's healing journeys. It's the importance of having a container that you do feel safe in to let things out, but also to find a space where you recognize that this story doesn't define you. So it's not necessarily completely characterizing you. So I'm really getting a sense of how this could have been like a really sort of profound experience.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, the other thing that's really interesting and brilliant is the casting, because I can't imagine two people being more different than Toyah and myself, and I just think it was such a brilliant thing to do, and to see her in a way that we don't normally see her. It was brave. I think it was very brave, and I think she was brilliant in it too. I mean, she certainly came out. It was fantastic performance.
Oh, 100%. And actually that was something I was curious about, the decision around choosing Toyah, and yes, what it was like seeing someone so different from you performing almost like a shard of you. I just think, because when it was first suggested, I thought, I just can't imagine that. It's like, but it just worked. I think it worked brilliantly on so many different levels, because I think everybody sees a performer like that in an incredibly, just so vibrant and courageous and confident, and all of those things. And I think it's worth remembering that even the person that comes across as the most confident, will have things that they will have dealt with, and I think that it just definitely adds another layer of interest, I think, to the film, definitely. Yeah, you've really hit it on the head, because I was watching Toyah, and of course we do have some suspension of disbelief where, as the viewer, we're reminded this is a person playing a character, but I think it's hard to completely let your awareness of who that actress is go. And to me, I think that's what made it so powerful, because it really gave me a sense of how the interior world can be so different to the world that's expressed externally.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the other things that inspired sounds like the wrong word, given the story I'd read in the paper. And it was during the pandemic, when I mean, it's not easy to see a doctor now, obviously, but then it was obviously so difficult. And this middle-aged woman, well, in her 50s, but I was struggling again with anorexia and trying to hide it from her family, because I think it's a form of addiction. So, when you suffer from that, I think you're the reason for trying to hide it from people is because you want to keep doing it. So, but what she was saying was that she felt at her age embarrassed she should have grown out of this, and she didn't have the right to go and get professional help. But I just think that's. I mean, this is one of my old hobby horses, but I do think our culture is so dismissive of older people, and I think that kind of feeds into that, really, that we don't feel valuable enough. We don't think we're worth it, and I just think that's really sad. I mean, nobody should ever feel I'm too old to get treatment for whatever they require. But as I say, because it's so seen, I think, as a young person's condition, there's a sense of shame as well in that I shouldn't, because I think people who don't understand the condition would probably see it as a form of self-obsession, which I mean, to some extent it is, but it's a mental health issue, so you can't, you're in the grip of this thing and you can't control it. So, it's a very complex thing, I think, that, I mean.
Yeah, and also taking the phrase self-obsession, but also recognising what the film is portraying and what you shared earlier, there is an element of self-disgust in there as well. So the almost wounding experience of someone who's suffering from anorexia because they're in a relationship of disgust with themselves, but somebody is viewing them as if they are obsessed with themselves. It can be very wounding.
Yeah, definitely.
And interesting what you shared about the article that you read, and also what's behind the theme of this film, which is you don't grow out of this.
No.
What I was thinking as you were talking about the woman sort of feeling ashamed and thinking, I should have grown out of this. That's often something that we're told as children, you're too big to cry now, or, come on, you're a big girl now. So it's sort of ironic that we're carrying conditioning that we received when we were younger, which we're still carrying in our 40s and 50s and 60s. Yeah. And so we're viewing ourselves through that lens as if, I really should have grown out of this by now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that the theme of anorexia, if we talk about that as a sensitive topic, and I know that this one had a personal connection, and that in some of your other plays or your radio dramas, you've covered other sensitive topics. I'm thinking of Pack, which was racism, which was bigotry. That was a stage play.
Yes.
So I'm curious, when you're coming to your work, so not necessarily Weightless, but if you think about radio work, if you think about theatre, and you're aware, okay, this is a topic that could be sensitive, how do you go about approaching that when you're working on the script?
I think for me, I always feel that the writer isn't there to sort of preach to anybody. So if we create really powerful, believable characters and just let them tell the story, you can deal with very, very challenging subjects, because essentially you're just saying, well, it's not the writer's view, because especially if you're giving two different points of view in a stage play from two different characters. So I think you can afford to be brave, and I also think we should be brave, because I quite often when I go to the theatre, I come out thinking, yes, but we already know that. I think we have to be quite brave and tackle quite controversial subjects, so that people might come out and argue about it, but that's a good thing. And I've often thought I would rather have a 1-star and a 5-star review than 3 stars all the way along, because I think if people love or hate something, then they've had a strong reaction to it. It's much more interesting, and you just nothing changes if people don't debate anything. So it's important, I think, to be brave, but to also remember that, you know, you're, as I say, the characters are telling the story, and it's you know, I mean, I think there's nothing more off-putting than when a character is very clearly just speaking the author's views. You know, it's not very, I don't think that's very interesting, but
yeah, I'm so with you on that, Louise. The difference between a sense of watching or hearing a character who's really talking from like an authentic place of self rather than preaching or talking about opinions. I really loved what you said about 1-star and 5-star reviews, because it relates to something we were chatting about before we hit record, which is that you said Weightless has been a little bit Marmite.
Oh, it has, yeah, definitely.
And let's go back to the writing process, because it sounds like you've got enough of an inner dialogue with this process that's really helping you. You're sort of telling yourself, you know, I want to invite debate. For somebody to love it and hate it at the same time, you know, that shows me that I've expressed something new. But I also know that there are writers who might be afraid of that very thing. They might be afraid of someone coming out of watching their film and hating it. So where do you think that comes from, that sort of inner resilience to be able to handle somebody disliking it and almost want to invite that debate around your work?
I think, I mean, I don't know where it comes from, because I am a bit of a people pleaser, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
That's so interesting.
But maybe it's because in your fictional world you can be somebody else, so you can become somebody who might be a bit braver and, you know, try different things and not worry so much about, you know, doing the right thing. And I think that's what I find I love about my writing. It's a place for me to go and just be completely liberated. And because I do think we've become very sort of polarized with views, and people they don't seem to have a relationship with anybody unless they feel they share their views. Whereas I think that's the joy of theatre, is that you can just provoke debate and people don't have to agree with you. And I think the other thing to remember is there are always going to be people, whatever you write, who are going to hate it and you know, not agree with what the themes of that's inevitable. And I think you kind of have to embrace that and accept, you know, I mean, we have book group and some of us will detest a book and some of us will love it, or, you know, whatever. And I think that's just the nature of what we do, really.
It sounds like there have been some key moments of your experience that have really helped with any potential fears. Like you said that you're a people pleaser, so there may be that potential fear of not pleasing people. But also what I'm hearing, Louise, is, well, when I sit in book group, I can love a book and someone can hate it. When I go to the theatre, I know that it's a medium that's designed to entice debate. So it seems to me that having that variation in your own experience is really helping ensure that fears don't hold you back. I suppose I really wanted to talk about fear and how it relates to writing, because again, I know that some people might have that fear because they want to please others with their writing. You know, especially when it comes to deeply personal topics. If we're writing about something that feels personal to us, that to me would imagine that we could be even more vulnerable of people not liking it. So I'm curious, how did you experience that when you heard that people either didn't resonate with the film Weightless, or if people don't understand it when it's something that's so personal?
Well, I mean, my own sort of personal experience of experiencing people who didn't get it was, you know, we'd have friends and we'd share the film with them. And, you know, I could just see that it didn't, that you can see by somebody's reactions when they're watching, whether it's kind of going through and resonating with them. So that was on a very personal level. I think because I know and understand my friends enough, I can see why it wouldn't. But in terms of submissions to festivals, and some loved it and it got awards, and others didn't even select it. But I do think what is interesting is that some festivals probably are more youthful than others, so they might not feel they can relate to this story in a way that if they're a more mixed age group might. So I did wonder whether perhaps some of the religious themes they might not quite connect to some of the references that I made, that to somebody is Catholic or has had a Catholic upbringing would kind of get those on a deeper level than somebody who doesn't. But I think it might be a film that will work maybe on different levels as well. So if you only get one level, you might not feel as moved as if you get all of them, if that makes sense. So but I think because of the theme and because it has a sense that it could be potentially very dark, some people, I think the most successful short films quite often are comedies, because people, they really enjoy a good laugh. So, and this obviously isn't funny, but I think it is a very hopeful, positive ending. So, yeah, I mean, so it didn't, with Pack, it was interesting because overall it got really, really good reviews. And then one reviewer, I think, gave it 1 and really, really hated it. But it's quite a political play. And I think a political play, sometimes people can't sort of disconnect from their views, and they feel affronted by, I think Pack is quite a level, I would like to feel that you don't really know which way I would vote, because I think that's very distracting, and I don't think you should be able to tell. But whether she interpreted a particular way, I don't know which way, but she was very angry. But as I say, I was quite happy with that, because I thought, an angry response is a response, and what you don't want is something to go in and just say, yes, it was fine, because they haven't been affected by it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I really love that, Louise. And also it's helping me understand that the more self-awareness we have around our work, so that we're able to ensure the work is about the characters, not us. Because I think if we've used the work as a sort of secret megaphone for us to just talk about our views, and it's hated, then of course we're going to feel quite wounded by that response. But as you say, if the work really just becomes a vessel for characters to live outside of ourselves and beyond ourselves, we can sort of then step back and then just see how people respond to it. Like you were genuinely smiling when you were talking about that 1-star review.
Yeah, it was really, quite amusing. As I say, I would, she was so passionate about it. I thought, great, you really responded. Those characters really got to you.
Yeah. And also, it seems to me that the more you understand your work and what it's revealing, what people will experience when they come to watch it, and also the different layers that people can experience, again, the more open you're going to be to how people respond to it, rather than it simply being, I wrote this and I really want to please you. I'm only saying it like that because I've certainly felt like that about some of my projects in my early days. It sort of just, my words on the page just felt like me. And so when people rejected it, they were rejecting me, and that was very hard.
Yeah, I think as writers, it's a book we don't, it's not us that's being rejected. It might be that the subject's already been done, or it's very easy to feel personal rejection, but because we get so much of it, it has to bounce off after a while, because it has to. Every writer, whoever they are, has always had rejection. It's part of the process, isn't it? So
I want to talk a little bit more about the process, sort of panning out from the writing process and thinking more about that long-term career process, I suppose. So I've read that one of your goals is to really establish yourself in the British film industry.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious as to how you might balance the creative aspects. So you talked earlier about having that brief outline, but then of course you've got to write it. So you've got the outlining, the briefs, the pitching, the working towards your goals, and then you've got, well, actually, I've got to write the scripts as well. So how do you balance that, the business side of it and the creative side of it?
Well, I mean, I don't enjoy the sort of, networking. You have to, I mean, you do have to spend quite a lot of time doing all of that. And I love the creative process is what I love, but I think it's just, I'm somebody who gets up very early in the morning. So, 6:30 to about 9:30, 10:00 is a creative writing time. And then you can spend not the rest of your day, because obviously you have to have a life as well, but, other parts of your day can be spent in doing, the networking, the letter writing, the, pitching ideas, which is a very, I think I've got better at that than I used to be. I've had two agents in the past, both, quite high profile agents, but I think I'm not unusual in that I think some writers like to do their own promoting and, networking and contacting people. I think it's a difficult balance, really. I mean, I think I've got to know some really nice people in the theatre that have supported me, and it's really nice to work with people that and trust, and you just work together well. So I think it's about building those relationships, and then because film is new to me, I've had to work quite hard about sort of connecting with people and all that side of stuff. And it is actually, film is, I have learned, is with theatre and radio drama, you really don't need an agent, but with film it's a lot more difficult because a lot of producers won't engage with anybody at all unless they come via an agent. But like everything in life, it is not impossible, because if you get to know, with festivals and the contacts you make, you can reach the right people, but you've just got to use perhaps a more roundabout way of doing it. But I mean, there are pluses and minuses, I think, with having or not having representation. But I know so many writers who almost seem like that's the end goal. But I do think, it's not the be-all and end-all. The most important thing is creating the work and getting it read. That's what really matters. So,
yeah, that's a powerful point to make. And I'm also interested, you mentioned that you'd gotten better at the networking. How do you know? Like, how would you how would you describe that?
I think I'm more assertive and more persistent without being, there's a fine balance between being persistent and being a pain in the neck. I think you've got to get that right. I mean, I think it could be the advantage of, once you get to a certain age, you're more confident, I think. I mean, we've had all that discussion about a lack of confidence, but all of these things are not black and white, are they? They're all very different shades of the grey, I think. And no, I think I did share with you earlier an illness I've had recently, and I think that's which I'm completely cured of now, but that is a wake-up call. And I think you then start to think, I'm not going to be backward in coming forward, because I really want this to happen. I've got to make the effort to make connections. And
that's a really interesting share, Louise, that idea of something giving you the real impetus to not be backward about coming forward. Because as you shared earlier, am I being too pushy? Am I being annoying? I actually, certainly from my own experience as a life coach, I know that our perspectives aren't always reliable.
Yeah.
I've had conversations with my clients who think they're being over the top and pushy, but actually they're being completely at the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And then other people who don't think that they're being pushy at all, but they're almost acting like a stalker.
Yeah.
So that's why I think, that's why I was curious about how you could measure that you're getting better, because I don't know how. I'd be curious to know what you think about this. I feel with networking, in my own life, I have found it really useful to almost have a kind of scientific tracking of it. So I know that if I'm following up, say after a week, that's an accepted length of time. I know that if I'm sending 3 emails in the space of 3 days, that might be considered stalker etiquette. So I actually find sort of having a spreadsheet and tracking when I'm messaging and how many messages I'm sending have really helped, because I know my perspective, because I'm very scared of making people angry. My sort of comfort zone is to stay hidden, which means I'm very unpushy with my networking. So that kind of scientific tracking has enabled me to be effective at my networking, I suppose.
That's really, I hadn't thought of doing that. That's a really, because I think you've got to, as you say, you've got to be careful about, we might think, oh, someone hasn't responded and it feels like a very short time to you, but somebody's got multiple tasks and multiple emails, and it might seem a short time to us, but to them it's nothing. And but at the same time, you don't want to forget a lead that you've approached. So it's about being sensible about how much you I mean, as you say, three consecutive emails is too much. Yeah.
And also that what you shared, that illness really giving you the motivation, because I think those of us who have become aware of that creative urge to express, that desire to tell stories, we can also have some conditioning around that, which is, the conditioning that says you're never going to make any money from a creative career. Be quiet, don't want to hear what you have to say. And so that conditioning can really hold us back from getting out there, from chasing our dreams. So sometimes it does take a diagnosis, or it takes just a wake-up call. It takes a coach to call you out and say, I don't think that you're living up to your potential. So how, if you could sort of describe that feeling, you said you want to move forward instead of backwards. How do you really feel about your gifts now and the way that you want to show up in the world?
Well, I've had enough endorsement now to know that I've got something that I ought to share. So I think that does help. So I think when you're first starting out, it is really difficult because you don't really know. I mean, you can share your work with friends, but the trouble with friends is they're always a bit too kind and support. So you're never really sure of. But I mean, from a professional point of view, I've also used script consultants, and I think it's really useful and important to use a professional person certainly in the early days, and well, even now, because sometimes you're too close to your work to be able to really distance enough and look at it in a way that somebody who is in the business will be able to. So I think that's a useful tool to use as well as your own judgment. I mean, it's also about knowing when to get that support, and not because you've got to allow the creative process to run wild for a bit before you sort of start taming it too much. But so I think I kind of know I can do it. Well, I can do what I do there. I mean, I sometimes look at TV and films that are thrillers, and I just think, there's no way on earth really, really plot-driven, intricate. And I just know I wouldn't. I think that's another important thing, actually, is knowing what you're good at, knowing what sort of work you create. And, obviously you'd get bored if you churned out the same thing all the time. But know your limitations and what theme. I mean, it's interesting how often we come back to the same sort of themes in our own work, because there has to be a connection, I think, to yourself and why are you telling that story. What is it that drives you to tell that particular story? It has to resonate, I think, but I feel truthful somehow.
Yeah, that feels true to me as well, Louise, the sense of recognizing those themes and also recognizing my zone of genius, as I might call it, where I excel. And like you say, if I'm comparing myself to the highly plotted police procedurals, which I love reading,
yeah. But
I couldn't write that. So it's to not compare, but to recognize what I have been, what I've been, what I've done well in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Useful. Louise, that's really raced by. I've really enjoyed getting to dive a little bit deeper into your work with you. And I like at this stage, towards the end of a conversation, just to give the people that I'm chatting with a moment to reflect. It might be that something dropped in while we were talking, a sort of insight that feels new. It might be that there was a question you were dying for me to ask you, but I didn't ask you. So is there anything that you just want to reflect on in the last few minutes or share?
I think what I did find interesting, because of your interest in nature, was how much that can be a part of our work without us even realising. I think that as I said to you earlier, I went for a jog this morning with a friend, and how powerful nature can be, and wildflowers and that sense of being close to water that's so eternal and life-giving, potentially could be life-taking. But I hadn't really, until I'd been introduced to you, thought about quite so much about nature, even though it's so important in Weightless. But it is certainly something to consider, I think, in our work.
Yes, and also, Louise, the way that you talked about it today, like, for example, the way that you noticed the poppies and the buttercups on your run, and you've got this sense of the seasons. I can see that, there is a part of you who's got their eye on nature and is kind of getting some really beautiful lessons by that backdrop, that ever-changing, yet ever-present backdrop.
Absolutely.
Louise, thank you so much for your time today. And I'm just love for you to just share. I mean, I know that you and I connected on LinkedIn, but if somebody watches this interview, they're eager to see the film that we've been talking about, they're eager to get in touch with you, what would be the best ways for them to do that?
Probably via LinkedIn would be a good, so it's a very good resource, I think. So I mean, I think you can put almost anybody's name and LinkedIn and you'll get a link, won't you, if you go onto their website. So
and we'll put your profile in the show notes below as well.
Perfect. Lovely. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.